Hi everyone. Tonight, we're going to talk about what it feels like when your own family decides you don't belong anymore and what you do with that heartbreak. Picture this. It's Christmas Eve. Your bags are packed. Your heart is full, and you've even made your famous cranberry pound cake. But before you can even lock your front door, you get a message that changes your life. That's what happened to me. One cold December, I stopped being someone's mother-in-law and became an inconvenience. You probably won't survive the kind of betrayal that sneaks up on you with a smile. But I did, and I want to tell you how. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where we're all tuning in from. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise. And let's get started tonight. It was Daniel's idea, my only son. Daniel called me the first week of December and said, "Mom, why don't you come spend the holidays with us this year?" His voice had that usual cheer, the kind that made you feel like maybe things would be different this time. I imagined us around the fireplace, exchanging gifts, sipping cider, like something out of a seasonal rom-com, with less makeup and more casseroles. I had my doubts, sure. His wife, Laura, had always been, how shall I put it, icy, the kind of woman who had seasonal throw pillows for every occasion, but couldn't throw you a smile to save her life. Still, I said yes. I even bought new slippers for the occasion, red velvet, a little gaudy, I'll admit, but when you're 74 and live alone with two cats named Morty and Beans, slippers are your runway shoes. The invite lasted 4 days. 4 days after that call, I got a message from Daniel. "Hey, Mom, about Christmas, can we chat?" And let me tell you, nothing good follows a text that starts with hey and ends with chat. When I called, Laura answered. Not Daniel, not my son, Laura. "Sophie," she said, using my first name like a stranger might. "We've been thinking, and you just don't really fit in with the vibe this year. It's going to be very curated. You know, upscale. Minimal," I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes your brain short-circuits when it hears something so ridiculous. It forgets how to process emotion. She continued, "It's not personal, but your whole coastal cottage look. It clashes. My look. I didn't realize I came with a theme. Unless quiet widow who feeds strays and keeps potpourri in crystal bowls is a decor category on Pinterest now." I asked to speak with Daniel. He got on the phone and said nothing for a good 10 seconds, just breathing. Then, finally, "I think Laura has a point. It might be overwhelming this year." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just said okay. Then I hung up. Because what do you say when your only child uninvites you from Christmas, like a bad +1? I stared at the tiny tree I'd already put up. I'd even wrapped his childhood stocking, the one with the crooked snowman he'd glued eyes on in 2nd grade. I sat down next to Morty and Beans, and the three of us just blinked at each other in silence. Old age wisdom fact. They say the older you get, the easier it is to accept disappointment. Lies. What actually happens is, you just learn to feel it quietly, so it doesn't embarrass anyone else. Off-topic fun fact. Slippers with memory foam soles are scientifically proven to reduce foot pressure, but apparently not heartbreak. It wasn't just about Christmas, you know? It was about being quietly erased. Like I was the out-of-date photo on their modern wall, something to be cropped. I'd spent decades thinking love was unconditional, that if I gave enough time, food, emotional availability, there'd be no question where I belonged. Turns out, that's not how family always works. Academic debate would suggest that family loyalty is a sociocultural construct, heavily influenced by economic dependence and emotional reward systems. Translation: people treat you well when it benefits them, and sometimes, not even then. The night after the call, I poured myself a glass of wine. Not the fancy kind Laura collects in color-coded racks, but the boxed kind, chilled by accident next to frozen peas. I put on my husband's old cardigan, the one with the hole in the elbow and the smell of cedar and memory. Then I sat by the window, watching the tide roll in. Waves don't care about Christmas. They just show up. Crash, leave, come back. I thought about that a lot. Was I a wave in my own family now? Coming in, crashing, unwelcome, maybe, still. I told myself I'd be fine, after all. I had my home, my books, my cats, my slippers. I said it like a mantra. Like someone trying to convince the mirror that she was okay. I wasn't. But here's the thing. No one tells you when you get older. Sometimes it's not the big heartbreaks that ruin you. It's the small, cruel dismissals, the quiet cancellations, the you just don't fit. And that was the last invitation I ever received from my son. The morning of December 24th arrived like a cruel joke, bright, blue-skied, and full of the kind of cheer I used to believe in. I woke up early, out of habit, more than excitement. No one was coming. No one had called. The house was silent, except for the hum of the heater and the soft thud of beans jumping off the windowsill. I'd planned to make French toast. You know, the good kind with nutmeg and a splash of orange zest, the way Daniel liked it as a teenager. But instead, I made oatmeal and left it to go cold on the stove. There's an old-age wisdom that goes something like this. If you wait long enough, someone will remember you. That morning, I realized it's not always true. I sat in my worn armchair, half listening to a Christmas special on TV, the one with the woman who magically falls in love with the small-town widower who also happens to own a Christmas tree farm. I wanted to throw something at the screen, not because it was unrealistic, but because I used to believe that kind of redemption was out there. For everyone, even for me, at noon, I set the table anyway, just for one. Plate, fork, napkin, candle I didn't light, salt and pepper out of sheer force of habit. That's the thing no one warns you about. When your world changes, your muscle memory doesn't, and then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I froze, then got up so fast, I startled Morty off the armrest. My hands trembled as I reached the front door. Part of me hoped it was Daniel, that maybe he'd come to his senses, maybe he'd arrived solo. No Laura, no curated nonsense. But no, it was Margaret, and behind her, Anna, and Dolores, and even old grumpy Fred from next door, holding a pie that looked suspiciously store-bought. "Merry Christmas, Sophie," Margaret said, holding up a foil-covered casserole dish like a peace offering. "You didn't think we were going to let you spend the day alone, did you?" I blinked, and blinked again. Then I stepped aside and let them in. It turns out, a dining table set for one becomes a table for five, pretty quickly if you make room. We didn't have matching plates or elegant centerpieces, no Instagram-worthy charcuterie boards. But we had wine, we had stories, we had enough laughter to make Morty hiss from under the couch. It was Margaret who brought it up first. "The beach house," she said between bites of stuffing. "You still planning to leave that to Daniel?" I paused mid-chew. That question hit like a gust of sea wind through an open door. I always thought I would. I admitted. It's what Tom and I planned. "You know, the legacy," Anna snorted gently. "Legacy? For the boy who cancelled Christmas on his own mother. Quirky fact for the day. A group of flamingos is called a flamboyance. Completely unrelated. But I thought of that while looking at my friends around the table. We were definitely a flamboyance of old misfits, and I wouldn't have traded them for anything." Margaret leaned in, her voice softer now. "You don't owe him anything, Sophie. Not after this." Her words sat with me long after the dishes were cleared. They burrowed into my chest like a seed waiting to sprout. That night, when everyone had left and the house returned to its quiet hum, I found myself standing in the hallway, staring at the old framed photo of Daniel holding a sandcastle bucket, all knees and gap-toothed smile. I loved him. I still did. But love shouldn't mean being disposable. Academic debate circles might call it conditional filial obligation. I called it cruelty disguised as adulthood. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the copy of my will. It still named Daniel as the sole inheritor of the house. The house I bought with Tom, the one we built with salt air and patience, floorboard by floorboard. And suddenly, I knew I wasn't going to give it to him. Not because I didn't love him, but because he didn't deserve it. Not anymore. I set the will on the desk. My fingers rested on the pen, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. The house wasn't just a building, it was a symbol of love, of memory, of everything I had ever stood for. And now, it was going to be a symbol of my strength. I didn't sleep much that night. The ocean outside my window was unusually restless, and my thoughts matched its rhythm. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my holiday cardigan that smelled faintly of cloves and old perfume, staring at the will I had taken out hours before. The pen lay next to it, uncapped, as if waiting for me to find my courage. It's funny. You can raise someone from the moment they take their first breath, teach them how to tie their shoes, remind them to wear sunscreen, and still they can grow up into someone who doesn't think twice about hurting you. That's the kind of heartbreak you don't read about in greeting cards. I made tea just to have something warm in my hands. Morty rubbed against my leg, purring like the world hadn't shifted on its axis. I envied him. His biggest worry was whether I'd forgotten the treats in the cupboard. I sat by the window and watched the moonlight stretch across the sand below. The house by the sea. Our house had always felt like a sacred place. My late husband, Tom, and I had bought it as a promise to each other that no matter what life threw at us, we'd always have a safe haven. When he died, I thought Daniel would inherit not just the deed, but the meaning behind it. But now, it felt like I'd been clinging to an idea that didn't exist anymore. Old age wisdom. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. I used to think that was just something bitter people said. Now I knew better. By morning, I had made the decision. I'd rewrite the will. But first, I needed to make it official. I called Thomas, my lawyer of 15 years. He'd handled everything since Tom passed. Taxes, health directives. Even that time, I briefly considered starting a candle business and needed help with paperwork. He picked up after the third ring, his voice familiar, if a bit rushed. Sophie, Merry Christmas. Or day after, I suppose. What can I do for you? I need to update my will, I said, as soon as possible. A pause. Of course. Anything in particular you'd like to change? I'm removing Daniel. Longer pause. Then a sigh. All right. Let's schedule a time this week. I felt it then, that twinge of guilt, like I was betraying my own child. But that guilt had company now. Resentment. Resolve. And yes, a little bit of revenge. Not the wild-eyed, movie kind. Mine came in quiet waves. It was the revenge of reclaiming what was mine. That same afternoon, I drove into town. The streets were still draped in leftover holiday cheer silver garlands, inflatable Santas that had begun to sag. I passed by the cafe Daniel used to love as a boy, the one with the raspberry muffins he'd stuff in his coat pockets when he thought I wasn't looking. So many memories, so much lost. When I arrived at Thomas's office, he met me with a polite smile and slightly reddened cheeks. Maybe it was the cold, maybe it was guilt. I didn't ask. He handed me a fresh copy of my will and a pen. You sure about this? Sophie, are you… He chuckled nervously. Touché? I signed. Just like that. I took Daniel out of my legacy. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. But here's your off-topic fact for today. Did you know octopuses have 3 hearts? 2 pump blood to the gills, and 1 to the rest of the body. And when they swim, the one for the body stops beating. That's how I felt, like I had 1 heart left. And it was pumping just enough to keep me walking out the door. When I got back to my car, I sat there a minute before turning the key. I watched a couple walk by, arms wrapped around each other, paper shopping bags swinging between them. I wondered if they'd ever know this kind of pain. Probably not. Academic debate might label what I was experiencing as late-life individuation, or the psychological reassertion of personal identity after years of familial enmeshment. I just called it waking up. I drove home with the window slightly cracked. The ocean air stung a little, but it cleared my head. Back at the house, Morty and Beans greeted me like I'd returned from war. In a way, I had… The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and chicken. The aftermath of the holiday feast my friends had brought lingered on the counter in Tupperware towers. I placed the updated will in the safe under my bed. That night, I lit a single candle and sat by the fire, letting the flames hypnotize me. I thought of Tom, of what he'd say if he saw how things had unraveled. I think he'd be proud, because sometimes Loving someone means refusing to let them walk all over you. And that was the beginning of something new. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to power. The morning after I signed the new will, I woke up with an unfamiliar sense of lightness. It wasn't joy exactly, but more like the relief you feel after a long cry, or when you finally remove a pebble that's been stuck in your shoe all day. I'd done it. I'd made a decision that was mine and mine alone. For once, I wasn't thinking about what Daniel would say or how Laura would react. I was thinking about me. The kitchen was quiet. As usual, Beans had knocked over his food bowl again, in what I could only assume was an act of passive-aggressive protest for not getting the chicken leftovers. I scooped his kibble back in, chuckling. "You're lucky you're cute," I mumbled. I opened the windows and let the sea air roll in. It was crisp and cold, and it carried that salty sharpness that wakes you up better than any espresso ever could. I stood there, hands gripping the window frame, and watched the waves smash against the rocks below. It was funny how violent the ocean could be, and yet how comforting it was to watch it from afar. That was when the thought hit me. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. Old age wisdom. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness. One empowers you, the other drains you. And for the first time in years, I felt the difference in my bones. By midday, I decided to go for a walk down to the beach. I bundled up in my coat, Tom's old brown wool one with the inside pocket that still held a ticket stub from a 1998 movie date we took. I hadn't had the heart to remove it. Some things you keep, even if they hurt. The beach was mostly empty, save for a few bundled-up locals walking dogs that seemed to resent the cold. I took my time. My steps were slow, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel each footfall. I let the sand press into my soles and let the wind tug at my scarf like an old friend who had too much to say. That's when I saw her, Laura, standing there. Of all places, on the same beach I had walked every morning for over a decade. She wasn't alone. Daniel was with her. They were just standing there, talking, arguing. Maybe I ducked behind a dune before they could see me. I know, not the most mature move, but give a 74-year-old a break. From my little sandy hideout, I watched Laura gesture wildly with her arms. Daniel looked pale, nervous. I couldn't hear anything. Of course, but I didn't need subtitles to know what was going on. My son was being scolded, and not in a cute, "honey, you forgot the eggs" kind of way. This was war briefing energy. Then he did something that surprised me. He turned away from her. His shoulders slumped, and he walked alone down the shoreline. Laura didn't follow. She just stood there, arms crossed, looking out to sea like it had personally offended her. I waited until they left. Then I walked home with a strange mix of satisfaction and confusion swirling inside me. I didn't know what was going on between them, but something was cracking. And I knew one thing for sure. They were feeling the loss now. Later that night, just after dinner, a questionable lentil stew I found in the back of my freezer, or my phone rang. I recognized the number. Thomas, the lawyer. I braced myself. "Sophie," he said, his voice a little too formal. "We need to talk. Something's come up." Of course it had. "I received a visit this morning," he continued. "From Daniel." I sank into my chair. What did he want? "He asked me to reverse the will." My stomach turned. Thomas kept talking. He said he was just clarifying your intentions, that you'd gotten confused. Shh, and he was here to fix it on your behalf. I didn't say anything. I was too stunned. Not because Daniel had tried to interfere that much, I had suspected, but because of the method, the audacity. He even brought in a document, Thomas added. "Something you supposedly signed years ago." Of course he did. Academic debate circles often refer to this type of behavior as inheritance manipulation through perceived dependency. I call it what it really is. Emotional blackmail dressed in khakis and cologne. "Did you do it?" I asked Thomas flatly. "No," he said quickly. "I told him I'd need to speak with you directly. But Sophie, you might want to get a second opinion. Just to be safe." I thanked him and hung up. And then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe I had once trusted this boy, this man with my heart, my finances, my legacy, Quirky off-topic fact. Female dragonflies will fake their own death to avoid unwanted male attention. Honestly, I considered borrowing that move. But instead, I poured myself another glass of boxed wine, opened a new notebook, and made a list of every lawyer within a 50-mile radius. It was time to go on the offensive. If Daniel thought I was just going to roll over and hand him everything, he had no idea who he was dealing with. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about the principal. This was about me. The next morning, I woke up with one thought on my mind. I needed a new lawyer, preferably someone young, hungry, and allergic to nonsense. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, none of that vanilla caramel fluff Laura always insisted on, and sat down with my list from the night before. I called 5 offices before one even picked up. It was a small firm downtown, run by a young man named Richard Klein. The receptionist told me he had room for a consultation that afternoon, and I didn't hesitate. I arrived early. His office was tidy, but not intimidating. No mahogany panels or leather chairs trying too hard. Just a clean desk, a fern that looked only mildly neglected, and a young man in a navy sweater who stood up the second I walked in. "You must be Mrs. Halston," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Richard." He didn't call me Sophie, didn't call me ma'am, either, just Mrs. Halston. Like I was someone worth respecting. That alone earned him a few extra points. I laid it all out, everything from Daniel's manipulation to the sudden visit to Thomas's office. As I talked, I watched Richard's brow furrow, then lift, then settle into a kind of quiet determination. "I don't like it," he said, flipping a page of notes. "Your son's actions are at best aggressive and, at worst, illegal. If what you're saying about the document is true," and he tried to pass off a forged amendment to your will, "we could be looking at fraud." I knew it, I muttered, sipping my too hot coffee from the paper cup he'd offered. "We'll need to review everything. The old will, the new one, any communication with your previous lawyer, and I'd recommend we file to formally revoke any earlier versions of the will, just in case." I nodded. "Do it." There was no hesitation in his voice, no patronizing explanation about letting this go for the sake of peace. He was ready to fight, and I needed someone like that in my corner. Old age wisdom. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your future is burn the bridge behind you. Just make sure the match is legal. As I left Richard's office, I felt a strange tingle in my chest. Not fear, not excitement, something else, something sharp and clear. Empowerment, maybe, or the very early signs of what my generation would have called a take-no-crap mood. I was no longer asking for fairness. I was demanding it at home. I pulled out every document I had. Mortgage statements, letters from Tom, bank statements, notes from Daniel, back when he still called me Mama. I stacked them on the kitchen table in one neat pile, then took a breath. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, scanned copies, and phone calls. Richard moved quickly. He contacted the court to notify them of a potential dispute over my estate. He issued a formal warning to Thomas, which, let me tell you, probably made the man spill his scotch, and he confirmed that the so-called amendment Daniel had waved around had never been notarized, which meant it was worthless. Quirky fact, if you sign a contract in crayon, it's still legally binding so long as all parties agree to it. I considered rewriting my will in glitter pen, just to make a point. One evening, while sorting through old letters, I found something I hadn't meant to stumble on. A card from Daniel on my 60th birthday. It was simple, written in his crooked teenage handwriting. "Thanks for always being there. Mom, I hope I grow up to be just like you." I stared at that line for a long time. What happened? What twisted? Buried thing had taken the boy who used to bring me daisies from the yard and turned him into a man who'd rather erase me than call me. Academic debate would chalk it up to nurture versus nature, I say. Maybe some people just get tired of where they come from once they think they've outgrown it. I folded the card and put it back in the box. Not because I wanted to remember, but because erasing it would have made me just like him. A few days later, the call came. It was Daniel. I didn't answer. He tried again the next morning. This time I picked up. Because if you're going to go to war, you might as well hear your opponent's battle cry. "Mom," he said. No preamble. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked flatly, though I already knew. "This lawyer, this guy, Richard, you hired. He's threatening to bring me to court. Only if you keep trying to steal from me," I said. "You're being dramatic," he snapped. "This is about what's fair, about what Dad would have wanted." That was the wrong thing to say. I felt my jaw tighten. "Do not use your father's name to justify theft." There was silence on the line. Then, "I just don't get why you're doing this." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the sea through my window. The waves were quieter today. Resting, maybe, because I finally realized something, I said. "I spent years giving to you, to your life, to your needs, and now I'm giving something to myself. Boundaries." Another silence. Then Daniel said something I hadn't expected. "If you don't fix this, I'll take you to court." There it was, the final play. I took a breath. "Then I'll see you in court." And I hung up. Old women don't always wear grey and knit in silence. Sometimes we lawyer up. The thing about preparing for a legal fight with your own child is it's a grief you don't know how to name. There are no sympathy cards for sorry your son turned into a greedy man-child. No hotline to call when the person you raised decides you're just a piece of paperwork standing in the way of their future. But I wasn't mourning anymore. I was strategizing. The day after that call, I went back to Richard's office with a folder so thick. The receptionist raised her eyebrows. It had everything: old property appraisals, home repair receipts, even the original blueprints of the beach house drawn up by Tom himself. The man could barely draw a stick figure, but he'd sketched that dream out like his life depended on it. And maybe, in a way, it had. Richard whistled as he flipped through the documents. "You weren't kidding," he said, impressed. "You've got receipts in the most literal sense." I gave a half smile. If I'd known I'd be preparing for battle at 74, I would have taken better notes. He leaned forward, his tone serious now. "This is good, Sophie. This strengthens your position. They'll have a hard time making a case that this house was ever meant to be theirs, especially if we can prove Daniel had no involvement in maintaining it." "Oh, he didn't," I said. "He barely helped move the couch in when we bought it," said his back hurt. "He was 14, Richard chuckled. "Even better. The plan was simple. File a formal notice of contest, submit evidence of coercion and attempted fraud, and position everything to show that I was not only mentally competent, but legally unshakable. It wasn't just about protecting my estate. It was about showing the court hell, the world that I wasn't going to be erased quietly. Old age wisdom, when people assume you're too tired to fight back. Let that be the moment you sharpen your claws. On the way home, I stopped by the little bakery on Main Street and bought a cherry Danish. I don't know why, it just felt appropriate. Maybe it was a victory Danish, or maybe I just needed a snack that didn't taste like betrayal. I sat by the ocean, watching the tide roll in with its usual apathy. Funny how the sea didn't care about human drama. You could scream your lungs out, and it would still keep its own rhythm. That kind of indifference used to scare me. Now it felt like freedom. Quirky fact of the day: a shrimp's heart is located in its head. That feels symbolic for some of the people in my life. When I got home, I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. I played music. Tom's old jazz records, the scratchy ones he used to put on while we danced barefoot in the kitchen. Morty watched me with judgmental eyes as I spun slowly in place. Hands lifted slightly, like I still had a partner. The record skipped once or twice. So did my knees. But it felt good. It felt alive. That night, I opened the guest room closet and took down the box labeled Dee's stuff. It had been untouched since he moved out for college. I figured if we were going to do this whole battle thing, I didn't need reminders of the good times clouding my judgment. Inside the box were old soccer medals, a cracked snow globe from a school trip, and a letter folded in half, faded around the edges. I sat on the bed and read it. It was from Daniel, a thank you note for a birthday party I threw him when he turned 9. He'd written in big, clumsy letters, "I had the best day ever. You're the best mom in the world. Even if you made me wear the hat." I remember that hat. A paper crown with glitter that kept falling into the cake. I folded the letter carefully, returned it to the box, and shut the lid. Sometimes love is a memory, not a promise. The next morning, Richard called. Daniel's lawyer just reached out, he said. They're not backing down. They're alleging that you've become mentally unfit, that Laura's witnessed signs of memory loss and confusion. I laughed. It was too absurd to be anything but comedy. I remembered to file my taxes 3 months early. I said, "Can I use that in court?" "Not exactly," Richard replied. "But we will push for a cognitive assessment, voluntary, if you're open to it." "Please," I said. "Let's give them the proof they need to choke on." Academic debate in elder law often involves the concept of presumed vulnerability, that once someone hits a certain age, they become easier to manipulate or easier to dismiss. But that presumption, it's often weaponized by the very people doing the manipulating. Daniel and Laura were about to learn the hard way that age and weakness aren't the same thing. 2 days later, I completed a formal psychological evaluation. The doctor, a cheerful woman with a sparkly blue pen, asked me everything from where I grew up to how many U.S. presidents I could name in under a minute. I named 8, then added, "And I could tell you which ones were overrated." She laughed. I passed with flying colors. Richard filed the results immediately. That night, Daniel called again. I let it go to voicemail. But I listened. "Mom, please, we can fix this. You don't have to do this. We're still family. Still family. After all that." I turned off my phone because right now, my family was me, my cats, and a beach house full of memories that no court and no sun could take from me. Let the storm come. I'd already found my shelter. It's a strange thing, watching someone try to build a case against you, especially when that someone once held your hand crossing the street and used to fall asleep on your shoulder during thunderstorms. But here we were. My son, Daniel, now my legal adversary, and Laura, well, she'd gone from holiday hostess to courtroom co-strategist. Richard and I met again early the next week, this time to review the documents Daniel's lawyer had submitted. I expected lies, I did not expect laziness. One file literally had a note that said, "Evidence. Family tension witness. Laura." Richard rolled his eyes so hard, I thought he might pull a muscle. "They're trying to build a case on character defamation and presumed senility," he said, "but based on what they've filed, it's a stretch. A stretch." I raised an eyebrow. "It's practically yoga." We laughed, not because anything was funny, but because you have to laugh when the alternative is screaming into a throw pillow. Old age wisdom. If you're going to be underestimated, let it be by someone who's about to lose. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Richard worked like a machine. He filed motions to suppress the so-called amendment, added my cognitive test results to the official record, and drafted a response that was sharp enough to draw blood politely. I, meanwhile, focused on keeping myself sane. That meant daily walks, hot tea, and pulling weeds out of the backyard with more aggression than necessary. At one point, I imagined every dandelion was Laura's smug smile, therapeutic. Honestly, then came the letter, delivered by courier, hand-addressed. Fancy parchment envelope like they were casting spells instead of suing their own mother. Inside was a formal warning. Cease interference with rightful estate succession or be prepared to answer for it in court. I laughed, out loud, and then I framed it. Not because I was proud of being sued, but because there was something poetic about being threatened in cursive. Later that evening, Margaret came over with a bottle of Pinot and a frozen lasagna. "I heard from Dolores," she said, plopping down on the couch. "Apparently Daniel's been telling people you're not well." "Oh, I'm not well." I tilted my head. "Then who paid his college tuition while doing the PTA and managing a full-time job?" "Don't shoot the messenger," she said, raising her hands. "Just thought you should know. We split the lasagna and toasted to my mental clarity." Quirky fact. Crows hold grudges. Actual. Studied behavior. You cross one, and it'll remember your face for life. I felt spiritually aligned with them. But even with the jokes, the wine, the bravado, I won't lie, some nights were hard. There were evenings I'd sit by the window and wonder how we'd gotten here. Me, penning affidavits against my own son. Him, trying to erase my autonomy with signatures and scare tactics. Was I a perfect mother? No, but I was a good one. I remembered the fever Daniel had when he was 6, how I slept beside him for 3 nights straight, checking his temperature every hour. I remembered the way he clung to my sweater at his first school drop-off. The night he broke his arm at 16 and tried not to cry while I held ice to it in the ER. He'd been mine once. Now, he belonged to someone else's ambitions. Academic literature on familial legal estrangement notes that litigation between close relatives often results in irreversible relational fractures. Translation: sometimes you go to court, and when it's over, there's no family left to return to. I knew that risk. And I was ready, because the alternative, losing my home, my dignity, my name on the deed of my own life, was something I wouldn't accept. Not quietly. Not ever. A few days later, Richard called with an update. They've pushed for an expedited hearing, he said. They want it settled before next quarter. My guess. They're hoping you'll break under pressure. Tell them to wear helmets, I said, because I don't break. Ibide, he chuckled. I'm starting to believe that. I spent the next hours reviewing our materials. Witness statements, property logs, even old photos. One in particular hit me hard. Tom and me, sitting on the porch of the beach house with baby Daniel asleep in my arms. Tom's hand rested on my shoulder, and we were both smiling like we'd figured it all out. That photo went into my bag for court. Because sometimes your best evidence is the life you actually lived. I closed the file, took a deep breath, and whispered to the empty house, I'm ready, Tom. Ready to defend what we built. Ready to remind them who I am. And just like that, I wasn't scared anymore. The morning of the hearing was grey, damp, and absolutely fitting. The kind of sky that looks like it hasn't made up its mind. I stood in front of the mirror for longer than I'd like to admit, adjusting my scarf. Not because it needed fixing, but because I needed a task to calm my hands. My coat still smelled faintly of rosewater and cedar, and I could hear Morty and Beans chasing something invisible in the hallway. I turned away from the mirror and looked at the framed photo on my dresser, Tom, holding baby Daniel, like the world had just handed him the secret to happiness. I whispered, I hope you're watching today, at the courthouse. Richard met me on the steps with 2 coffees in hand. Mine was exactly how I liked it, no sugar. A little cream, hot enough to burn my tongue if I wasn't careful. You ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, I said, taking a sip. If I faint in there, just roll me under the table. He smiled, noted. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I expected. Just 2 rows of pew-like benches, a few dusty flags, and a judge with the kind of face that said she'd seen every dirty trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. Daniel and Laura were already seated. She wore a beige pantsuit so stiff it could have walked in on its own. Daniel wouldn't look at me. His hands were folded, jaw tight. That look he used to get when he didn't win something like losing was a personal insult. Old age wisdom. The people who hurt you will always act offended when you finally stand up for yourself. The judge called the room to order. Petitioner, Daniel Halston. Respondent, Sophie Halston. Just hearing our names said like that opponents in a legal match felt like being dunked in cold water. Richard stood and opened with clarity and confidence. He laid out the evidence, my age, mental fitness, documented ownership of the property, and the timeline of events. He even had character statements from my neighbors, friends, and that nice girl who delivers my groceries. All said the same thing. Sophie is sharp, independent, and more than capable of making her own decisions. Then Daniel's lawyer stood. He was one of those men who probably practiced his smiles in the mirror. He said I had become vulnerable, that Daniel was only acting in her best interest, that I had been confused when I changed my will, and that Laura, patient Laura, had been emotionally affected by the family strain. I wanted to stand up and scream. Instead, I just clenched the paper in my hand tighter. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly. No cane, no wobble. Just me, in my old grey boots and scarf. Your Honor, I said, voice steady. I'm not confused. I'm not vulnerable. I'm angry. And I'm allowed to be. There was a beat of silence. I glanced at Daniel, who now looked up at me for the first time. But I wasn't talking to him anymore. This house was built by my husband and me, with money we saved, walls we painted, and floors we swept ourselves. I raised my son in that house. I cooked every birthday dinner there. I said goodbye to my husband in that living room. And I made the decision to leave it to someone who would honor all that, not someone who treats me like an obstacle. I held up the letter Daniel had sent to Thomas, the one asking him to reverse my will behind my back. I may be 74, but I am not your footnote. I am not a placeholder until you decide I'm useful again. I am your mother, and I deserve better. Quirky fact: butterflies can taste with their feet, which is strange, but still more dignified than how Daniel was squirming in his chair just then. The judge didn't smile. She didn't even blink, but she nodded once. And I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had said what needed saying. Academic analysis of intergenerational conflict often suggests that unresolved childhood grievances play out in adulthood through financial entitlement or resentment. Personally, I think sometimes people just turn selfish when life doesn't hand them what they think they deserve. The rest of the hearing was a blur, legal terms flying back and forth like verbal dodgeballs, but I sat tall. I kept my hands folded, and I never once looked away. After it ended, the judge said she'd review everything and deliver her verdict in writing. The courtroom emptied out slowly. Daniel and Laura left without saying a word, but Richard turned to me with a soft smile. "You did good, Sophie." I nodded, holding my purse tightly. "No matter what she decides," I said. I told the truth. Outside, the wind had picked up. My scarf whipped around like a flag. I tightened it, took a deep breath, and looked up at the clouds. Let the storm come. I was still standing. The courthouse door clicked shut behind me, and with it, something inside me exhaled. Not relief exactly, more like the pressure easing for a minute before it builds again. The clouds above were breaking just slightly, slivers of pale blue cutting through grey, and for a moment, I stood there on the sidewalk doing absolutely nothing but breathing. That was the thing no one told you about standing up for yourself at this age. It feels good and terrible all at once. Richard walked me to my car. He didn't say much, just handed me the folder we'd used in court and gave my shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "She'll take this seriously, Sophie," he said. "Don't expect it tomorrow, but we'll know soon." I nodded and climbed into the driver's seat. I didn't drive away right away. I sat there watching people walk past kids holding giant drinks, a man adjusting his tie in the reflection of a car window, a woman carrying a potted plant way too big for one arm. Everyone was going on with their lives. Meanwhile, mine felt like it had been stretched thin and ironed flat in a courtroom. On the drive home, I passed a florist, and don't ask me why I pulled over and went inside. Maybe I needed something alive in my hands. Something I chose just because I liked the way it looked, not because it made sense or had a function. I left with a small vase of ranunculus in peach and cream. Quirky fact: ranunculus flowers mean radiant charm, which, honestly, I think should be my new Wi-Fi password. When I got home, Morty greeted me at the door with a yawn that made it look like he was either terribly unimpressed or had been plotting a coup all day. I set the flowers on the kitchen table and changed into pajamas by 3 o'clock. Because what else does one do after metaphorically throwing hands in court? The next few days passed like that. Quiet, heavy. I stayed off social media, ignored a few texts, even let Margaret's call go to voicemail once. I wasn't sad. I wasn't afraid. But I was tired, bone-deep tired. There's a kind of fatigue that comes from defending yourself to people who should have never doubted you in the first place. Old age wisdom. Silence can be both punishment and protection. I needed mine to be the latter. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Not the letter, but a letter. From Daniel. I found it sitting in the mailbox, handwritten in thick ink. The envelope was creased, like it had been carried around in someone's coat pocket too long. I stared at it for a while before opening it, not because I was scared, but because I wasn't sure if I wanted whatever was inside to matter. I read it at the kitchen table with the ranunculus quietly blooming beside me. "Mom, I don't know how we got here. I don't know how I became the kind of man who sues his mother. Laura says I'm just doing what's right, but nothing about this feels right anymore. I miss you. I miss the sound of your laugh, your weird little lectures about birds, and the way you always kept cookies in the freezer, even though I complained they were too hard. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm not even asking for forgiveness yet. I hope we're not too far gone. Daniel, I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't cry, not right away, but something in me softened just a bit, like snow starting to melt at the edges of a rooftop. You don't forget the burn of betrayal, but you start to believe that maybe the other person remembers who you used to be to each other. Academic scholars often refer to this as relational repair, a slow, intentional process of reconnecting through small vulnerabilities. But all I knew was this: my son had picked up a pen instead of a lawyer, and that had to count for something. That evening, I called Margaret and finally picked up her fourth voicemail. "You alive?" she asked immediately. "Because if not, I'm coming over with wine and a Ouija board." "I'm okay," I said, staring out the window. "I got a letter from Daniel." "Oh," her voice rose. "A good one, or the kind you burn and salt the ashes of. A surprising one." She paused. "Are you going to write back?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't know," I said finally, "but I'm going to think about it." That night, I slept with the letter tucked inside a book on my nightstand. Not because I needed to reread it, but because it reminded me that even broken things can hum, faintly, with the possibility of healing. Still, the court ruling hadn't arrived. And until it did, this wasn't over. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was bracing for impact. I felt like I was bracing for clarity. I don't know if you've ever waited for a court ruling before, but let me tell you, it's a lot like waiting for water to boil, except the pot is your entire life, and someone else is holding the stove dial. Each morning, I'd check the mailbox, like I was waiting for a love letter, only to find grocery coupons and the occasional catalogue for orthopedic sandals. Still, I checked. Every day? Religiously. Richard had warned me it might take a few weeks, and we were barely on day 8. But patience isn't something you have in abundance after you've lived long enough to know how quickly life can turn on you. So I kept myself busy. I reorganized the spice cabinet, cleaned out the laundry closet. At one point, I found a box labeled 1993, vacation or possibly tax stuff, and just quietly closed it again. I also started going on longer walks, down the beach, past the old dock, through the path lined with sea pines. The cold air stung my cheeks, but it felt good to move. It made me feel like I was still in motion, even if the rest of my world had hit pause. That's where I was on one of those walks when my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I don't usually answer those. But that day, I did. "Hello? Mom!" His voice was small, hesitant. "Daniel?" "Yeah, I know I probably shouldn't have called. I wanted to say I meant what I wrote." I stopped walking, stared out at the grey ocean. The tide was low, and a few gulls were picking at something in the sand. "I got your letter," I said. I read it 3 times. Silence. "Did it help?" he asked. "Help what?" I replied. "Help you understand that I'm sorry. Old age wisdom. Apologies don't undo the hurt, but sometimes they loosen it enough so you can breathe around it. I believe you regret it," I said after a pause. "I don't know if that's the same thing as being sorry." He sighed. "I know I've messed everything up. I listened to Laura when I should have listened to my gut. I thought I was doing what Dad would have wanted, that this house should stay in the family. It is staying in the family," I said. "It's staying with me, where it belongs." He didn't argue. "Instead," he said, "I don't want this to be the last thing between us." "Neither do I said quietly. "But wanting doesn't make it easier." Quirky off-topic fact. Turtles can breathe through their butts. I learned that from a trivia calendar, and I bring it up now, only because sometimes conversations get so emotionally heavy that the absurdity of life sneaks in just to keep you from falling apart. Daniel and I talked for 12 more minutes. Nothing dramatic. Just a gentle unraveling of anger, a little untangling of guilt. He told me about work, about how Laura was staying with her sister for some space. I told him about the ranunculus on my table, and how Morty had developed a vendetta against the broom. And then he said something I hadn't expected. "If the judge rules in your favor, I won't fight it. I promise." I didn't say thank you. I didn't gush. But inside, a knot I'd carried for months began to loosen. After the call, I sat on a driftwood bench and let the wind push at my hair. The ocean smelled like salt and coming rain. I pulled my coat tighter and closed my eyes. Academic studies in forgiveness often refer to the empathy gap, the distance between two people's understanding of each other's pain. In that phone call, Daniel had stepped across the gap. Maybe not the full way, but far enough that I didn't feel alone on my side anymore. When I got home, I wrote him back. Daniel, I'm not ready to let this all go. Not yet. But I'm willing to try. If you are too, maybe we can start somewhere simple. Dinner. Just us. No court. No lawyers. No Laura. Think about it. Mom, I didn't send it immediately. I let it sit on the counter overnight. Then the next morning, after coffee and a few moments of staring at the sea, I dropped it in the mailbox. Later that same afternoon, I came back from the grocery store and found a thick envelope in the mail. The court seal. I brought it inside, set it on the table beside the now slightly droopy ranunculus, and stared at it like it might hiss or explode. Then I opened it. The judge's decision was brief, but decisive. The house was mine. The will stood. Daniel had no claim. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with something deeper, something I hadn't felt in a while. Peace. I didn't dance or scream. I didn't even smile. I just sat there quietly, letting it wash over me. The noise was gone. The war was over. They hadn't taken my home. They hadn't taken me. And now I could finally decide what came next. I don't know what I expected to feel the day the court ruling arrived, but Hollow wasn't on the list. I'd imagined triumph, vindication, maybe even a dramatic soundtrack swelling in the background. But all I felt was quiet, a deep, still silence, like the sound of snow falling in a forest. The house was mine. The law had spoken. And yet, instead of dancing, I just made a sandwich. Turkey and mustard, if you're curious. Not even toasted. That's what winning tastes like, sometimes dry bread and a little confusion. I called Richard later that afternoon. He sounded genuinely thrilled. Congratulations. Sophie, I hope you know this was a slam dunk. You were composed. You were prepared. And you made your case better than half the lawyers I know. Thank you, I said, almost automatically. It feels surreal. You did something most people are too afraid to do, he added. You fought back. And you won. He offered to send over the finalized paperwork, and even joked about coming by to celebrate. I've got a bottle of champagne in my trunk for client victories, he said, although technically, it's been there for 9 months. I told him I'd let him know. But deep down, I knew I didn't want a party. Not yet. Old age wisdom. Sometimes victory doesn't feel like a parade. It feels like finally taking your shoes off after walking through a storm. That evening, I sat out on the porch with a blanket draped around my shoulders. The sea was calm, unusually so, as if it had been holding its breath along with me. Morty curled up beside my chair, and Beans, ever dramatic, perched on the railing like a gargoyle guarding a queen. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the court hearings, Daniel's phone call, the letter, the years of trust that had crumbled so quickly. And yet, something in me still wanted to believe in the possibility of repair. Because here's the hard truth. When you love someone that deeply, cutting them out completely feels like amputating a part of yourself. Quirky fact. Starfish can regrow lost limbs. I envied that ability more than I care to admit. The next morning, I received another letter, this one from Daniel again. Handwritten, shorter. Mom, I got your note. I'd like to have that dinner. No expectations. Just a meal. Just us. I sat there holding it like it was radioactive. Forgiveness is never clean. It doesn't show up on your doorstep in a perfect package. It arrives in the form of awkward conversations, half-hearted apologies, and dinner invitations that feel like landmines. But I was tired of being at war, so I texted him, dinner, Friday, 6 p.m., my place, no hearts. No exclamation points. Just an opening. That week, I prepared the house not like a mother dressing up for her child, but like a woman taking back her space. I put out fresh flowers, vacuumed the hallway. I even made the living room feel warmer, lighting the fireplace and laying out Tom's old knit blanket on the back of the couch. Friday arrived like any other day, quiet, cool, and full of unspoken possibility. At 5:59, Daniel pulled into the driveway. I saw his car through the window. Same old sedan, same nervous parking style angled like he wasn't quite sure of his place. That felt poetic. Honestly, I opened the door before he could knock. "Hi," he said, sheepishly. "Come in," I replied. He stepped inside slowly, looking around like he was visiting for the first time in years, which, in a way, he was. His eyes lingered on the fireplace, on the old photos still lining the hallway, on the smell of rosemary and roasted chicken coming from the kitchen. "You still make that rosemary chicken," he said, cracking a faint smile. "I never stopped," I replied. We sat at the table, no fanfare, no appetizers, just the clink of plates and the occasional nervous sip of water. For the first few minutes, we didn't talk about anything important. We talked about work, about how his job had changed, about how his apartment flooded last summer and Laura cried for 2 days straight. But eventually, the conversation turned. "I'm sorry," he said, finally, "for everything, for the way I handled it, for letting it get that far." I looked at him. "I'm not ready to say it's okay," I said carefully, "but I'm here, and that means something." He nodded. "That's fair. Academic studies in family systems theory talk about rupture and repair. The concept that healthy relationships aren't defined by the absence of conflict, but by how well they recover after the damage is done. I didn't know if we'd recover, but I knew we were starting. After dinner, we sat by the fire for a while. He asked about the beach house. I told him I'd decided to stay, maybe forever, that it was my home, and I'd earned every square inch of it. He didn't argue. He just said, "I'm glad it's still yours." And for the first time in months, I believed him. When he left, we didn't hug, we didn't promise anything, but there was a softness between us that hadn't been there before, a quiet acknowledgement that we might not be what we were, but we weren't enemies anymore either. As the door closed behind him, I sat back down on the couch and pulled the blanket over my legs. The fire crackled, the cats yawned, and I let myself relax. The court had given me back my house. But tonight had given me something more surprising. The first stone in rebuilding something I thought was gone. Not perfect, not painless, but real. The days that followed our dinner moved slowly, like a boat drifting just beyond the tide. There was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic moment of healing where we both sobbed and fell into each other's arms. Just space and a cautious willingness to let that space fill with something gentler. Daniel didn't call the next day. He didn't text either, but 3 mornings later, I found a bag of coffee beans hanging on my front doorknob, a small sticky note attached. "Thought you might like this better than that stuff in the tin." It was the brand Tom used to love, French roast. Dark, a little bitter. Smells like rainy days and regret. I smiled, tucked it under my arm, and walked inside. No reply. No thank you text. Just a quiet acknowledgement in the form of a freshly brewed cup that afternoon. Old age wisdom. When someone hurts you, it's not the apology that heals you, it's the consistency that follows it. Over the next week, we exchanged a few short messages. Nothing deep, just check-ins. A meme about cats. A reminder about a local storm warning. I wasn't trying to rebuild the past. I was trying to see if something new could grow in its place. One afternoon, I saw him walking on the beach below my house, alone. No, Laura, no phone in his hand, just him and the sea. I didn't go out. I didn't wave, but I watched for a while. Quirky fact. Sea otters hold hands when they sleep so they don't drift apart. I've always loved that image. 2 creatures, side by side, just trying not to lose each other in the current. A few days later, he called again. His voice sounded lighter. "Hey, I'm thinking of taking some time off work. Just a week. Maybe come out here and help around the house. You know, if you'll have me." "Help how?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Clean the gutters. Fix that step on the back porch. Paint the window frame that's chipping. Stuff like that." stuff he hadn't touched in 15 years. Okay, I said. Bring work gloves. And I'm not feeding you every night. He chuckled. Fair. That weekend, he showed up with a bag of tools, a pair of old sneakers, and a humility I hadn't seen in him since he was 16, and failed his driver's test. He didn't stay in the house, slept in his car the first night. Then, at the small inn up the road the rest of the week. Boundaries. We both agreed. Baby steps. During the day, we worked side by side, him on the ladder, me below handing up supplies. At one point, I handed him a wrench when he needed a screwdriver, and he muttered, Mom, that's not even the right universe. I laughed. Sorry, I said. Turns out spite doesn't improve my tool knowledge. One night, after a full day of sanding and repainting, we sat on the porch and watched the sun melt into the sea. He passed me a beer. I took it. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then, quietly, he said, Laura and I are separating. I turned my head. He didn't look sad, just worn down. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. Yeah, it's been coming for a while. We wanted different things, or maybe we never really knew what we wanted at all. He sipped his drink. She wanted the house. That was part of it. She thought it was ours to take. And he paused. I let her believe it. Maybe I believed it too. And now, I asked. Now I know it's not mine, he said. Not unless you say it is. Academic research on family roles would call this a moment of realignment, where adult children recognize their parents not as extensions of their needs, but as people in their own right. I just called it maturity, finally. That night, I went to bed feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. The next morning, Daniel offered to fix the mailbox, said it was leaning too far to the left, like it had something to say but was too shy to speak. I let him. I watched through the window as he knelt in the dirt, adjusting the post, hammering new nails into the frame. Morty sat beside me, watching too. Still think he's the villain? I asked him. He yawned. Fair, I whispered. We'll see. Old wounds don't vanish with one good week, but sometimes they stop bleeding. Later that day, Daniel stood at the door, bags packed. I'm heading back tomorrow, he said. I just wanted to say thank you. For dinner, for the work, for giving me a chance. I didn't give you a chance, I replied. You earned one. He nodded. Do I still have to call before I visit? Yes, I said. And don't bring Laura next time. He cracked a smile. She wouldn't come anyway. Then we agree on something. We hugged. Briefly. No drama. Just two people quietly figuring out what it meant to love each other again without burning the house down. As he walked away, I stood in the doorway until his car turned the bend in the road. Then I went inside, turned on the kettle, and opened the window just enough to let the ocean in. Weeks passed. The house was quiet again, not the kind of quiet that hurts, but the kind that feels earned, peaceful. Every creak in the floorboards felt familiar, like an old song humming beneath my feet. The wind still howled some nights, but now I didn't mind. I'd faced louder things. Daniel called every Sunday. Nothing heavy, just check-ins. A recipe he tried. A book recommendation. Once, he even asked how Morty was doing. Still judging humanity, I said, one long blink at a time. We didn't talk about the lawsuit anymore. We didn't need to. That chapter was sealed, not forgotten, but folded gently into the past, like a letter you don't reread, but can't bring yourself to throw away. One afternoon, I stood in the garden Tom and I once built. The hydrangeas were in bloom, and the rosemary bush had gone wild again. I clipped a few sprigs and brought them inside, placing them in a jar by the sink. They filled the kitchen with scent sharp, grounding, alive, old age wisdom. Sometimes the best way to heal is to return to the smallest things that once brought you joy. A smell, a sound, a chair in the sun. I started writing again. Nothing fancy. Just a notebook on the table. Reflections. Letters I'd never send. Stories no one might ever read. One entry simply read, I survived losing the version of my son I thought would last forever, and I'm learning to love the man who came back. Another read, my house is quiet again, but I am not alone. Then one day, Something unexpected arrived in the mail. A legal envelope. For a moment, my chest tightened, but this one wasn't from a lawyer. It was from Daniel. Inside was a notarized letter. It read, "As per our conversation and my own decision, I formally relinquish any and all claims to the property at 78 Coastal Drive. I respect my mother's ownership, her autonomy, and the life she's built here. This is her legacy. I no longer wish to fight it. I only hope to be welcome in it again." At the bottom, in his scratchy handwriting, "Love you, Mom. No theatrics. Just closure. Academic articles will tell you that reconciliation is a process, that it's non-linear, that it demands equal parts honesty and humility. But I'll tell you this, sometimes it starts with a war and ends with a choice not to fight anymore." That evening, I made 2 cups of tea, one for me, one for Tom. I set his down on the windowsill like I used to. The sea was silver that night, calm, smooth, reflecting the sky like a mirror that had stopped shaking. I sat by the fire with a blanket and a pen and wrote one last letter I never meant to send. "Dear Daniel, I loved you before you had a name. I loved you when you didn't know how to love yourself. I loved you when you forgot how to love me. And I still do, but now I love myself too. So this house, this life, it's mine, and you're welcome to visit, but never to take, Mom." I folded the page, tucked it into the back of my notebook. And then, just like that, I let go. Outside, the ocean kept moving. The waves kept breaking. And somewhere in that rhythm, I finally found rest. Not the kind you take when you're tired, the kind you take when you've come home. It's been a year since the court case. The house still stands strong, weathered. And holy mine, the porch has new railings. The garden's fuller. There's a fresh coat of paint on the front door, seafoam green. The color Tom always said made the house smile. Daniel visits now. Not often, but enough. He brings his own groceries, washes his own dishes, and doesn't touch the thermostat. Progress. We don't talk about Laura. He's dating someone new, quieter, kinder, and this time, I see him making his own choices, not living someone else's dreams. Last Christmas, he came by with a pie he made himself. It was a little burnt. We ate every bite. We still have our silences, still dance around some memories, like they're glass on the floor. But there's laughter now, too. Small, hesitant, precious. One day, as we were walking the beach, he asked, "Would it be okay if I brought my kids here someday? You know, when I have them?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "If they know how to treat a home with respect, they're welcome." He nodded, didn't push. Later that night, he left a seashell on the windowsill where Tom's tea used to sit. Didn't say a word about it, but I noticed, and I kept it, because some legacies aren't written in wills. They're written in forgiveness, in dinners eaten slowly, in stories retold and wounds that finally stop aching. And sometimes they're written in seashells,